he is sharing his idea of what it takes to write the blockbuster novel. And one of the things he says it needs to be topical, trendy, and sexy, either newsworthy hotspots or uncharted territory for a setting. So let's talk about your Jack Reacher books using that for standard. Where did you decide you were going to put, who's Jack and where did you put him?
Well, as you know, Jack is, I mean, he's always called Reacher as far as I'm concerned. He has a first name, no middle name, but he has a first name, Jack, but he's Reacher fundamentally. And he is a person with nothing, because when you go into this, again, thinking commercially, obviously, I admire a tremendous amount of other writers, and I love reading their stuff. And really, because I love reading it, I did not want to imitate it, because I felt, here's this slew of people doing this, doing that so well. Why would I be crazy enough to try and compete with that? It makes no sense at all. The sense is in finding something that nobody else is doing and trying to do that instead. And so typically, let's say, a novel in this genre will have a hero, certainly, and the hero will have a sidekick, and the hero will have a job and a location, you know, be it Boston or LA or wherever, and probably a girlfriend, maybe a favorite bar, maybe an alcohol problem. All of these things. It's what I call the soap opera, with the greatest possible respect, because, as you said, I worked in television, kept a roof over my head for 18 years with soap operas. Nobody knows better than me the narrative power of a soap opera. But everybody else was doing it in books, and I didn't want to. So Reacher is none of the above. He is a hero, and that's it. He has no home, no job, no family, no possessions. He will not even carry a suitcase, so he has whatever he stands up in, and that is all. Simply because I wanted that to be literal. You know, he wanders from place to place. He's an unemployed drifter. He's not a bum. You know, he has this noble past. He was an army officer. He, perfectly respectable guy, but he is now unemployed, a wanderer, which was partly literal for the sake of the stories, but also partly metaphorical, in that he is just who he is. He's some kind of elemental force. And so to me, the commercial sense in that was twofold. It stood out. Nobody else is doing that. Nobody else has a hero in that situation. And second of all, it meant, you know, I can write a series. I'm now up to book 6. I've just, in fact, finished book 7 for next year. And nothing has ever saved me. You know, think about these other guys. Let's say you've got a private eye in Chicago. That's your story. Then every page one is fundamentally the same. You know, the private eye gets to his or her office, sits at the desk. There's an obligatory scene where there's no work and there's bills to pay, and in comes the client, and, you know, that's page 3, and then you're on with the rest of the story. And believe me, I love reading that stuff, but looking at it as a writer, I'm thinking, wouldn't I just actually approach each page one every year with just a little bit of boredom or apprehension somehow? But with Reacher, page 1 can be radically different. He can stumble into something by accident in any part of the country, or he can be hunted down and asked to intervene in any other part of the country. The flexibility is tremendous, which, because again, looking ahead, you can't presume anything, but you obviously hope that you're going to be successful. So you think, okay, what does success mean? And what it actually means is you're going to be doing this for several years, or hopefully many years. So looking ahead, I wanted to make sure that in my 8th year or my 10th year or something like that, I wasn't bored to death. Because I believe there's absolutely no way that you can disguise that the author is bored with a book.
Oh, I agree with that entirely. But let's get back to Reacher here for a minute. He was an Army officer. He's presumably retired from his, what, 20 years, whatever it might be?
Well, no, he only served 13 years.
Okay.
And it's really never discussed exactly why he left the Army. We know that the Cold War ended and there were budget cuts and the Army as a whole got smaller. They call it, in Army jargon, they called it riffing, RIF, reduction in force. And so obviously some people left. There was a recruitment freeze and some people left. And it's never really been explained why did he leave. And that's an issue that is in the back of everybody's mind. Was he basically fired? Was he asked to leave? Was he disillusioned and therefore left? We don't know exactly. But he was basically in the middle of a career. and was cast adrift. And actually before the career, he'd been an army brat himself. So that his entire life since birth was all about one army base every few months, round and round the world in this kind of mad chaos that is the military.
Sure.
So in his mid-30s, he's out, he's suddenly adrift in civilian society, and he's got this kind of grotesquely overdeveloped set of skills in a very narrow arena, which is the rough and tough world of investigation in the military. And he's got no idea at all about the rest of civilian life. And there's a kind of tension there, and it gives him a certain sort of awkward appeal. You know, this is a man who doesn't know how to do most things.
Well, you know, I mean, I really thought, particularly in Killing Floor, I've always kind of likened it to the movie Shane. You know, but I mean, he is sort of a gunslinger in the sense that although he's not necessarily for hire, in fact, he isn't very often for hire, he gets to ride in and do his thing and then ride out of town alone. But he has some sort of income stream. So even though you haven't explored it, obviously he's gotten some sort of severance package, or he's inherited money, or something's happened, because while he operates off cash, he's very careful to do that. He obviously has, you refer to it in a couple of the books, he has, you know, a regular, he's set up a deal with a bank so he can get money.
He has money in the bank, and there are a couple of hints in some of the books about where it came from. One is the gratuity he got when he left the army. And then he was left an inheritance by an unlikely, from an unlikely source in one of the books. And he's very cheap. He doesn't spend much. Out of preference, he won't, he doesn't like possessions, and he won't stay in a fancy hotel or anything, so he doesn't really need very much.
Well, I realize he's a minimalist, but I mean, there's always this problem when you have a not professionally employed sleuth, is how is this person going to exist?
I'm aware of that, yeah. And actually,
so I thought you'd solved it pretty well.
I thought about it very intently, actually, because I was having another conversation with somebody else once who was asking me specifically about the impact of women writers in this genre. And they had a tremendous impact. I'm thinking of two in particular, Sue Grafton and Sarah Paretsky, who started out some years ago, as you know, with the Alphabet series for Sue with Kinsey Mulhone and the V.I. Warshawskis. And what those series did, amongst many, many other things, is they produced a kind of reality in the genre which wasn't there before. One of the things I absolutely loved about both of those detectives is they would be in the middle of a case and they would have to go, you know, let's say in Kinsey Mulhone's case, they would have to fly out of Santa Barbara to LA, or, you know, somewhere in Portland, Oregon, or somewhere like that. They would have to take a flight to collect the next clue, and they were worried about how to pay for it. You know, they wrote about being in the airport with your credit card, wondering whether it was maxed out and would it be refused at the counter. And that was a breath of reality that I loved so much, because of course that's our own experience. You know, I've done that a million times, had my credit card even confiscated at the counter, because real people don't have a bottomless pit of money. And those two women writers did that so well that they kind of set the agenda, really, for those of us that came later. So the money thing was something that had to be rooted in reality for me. So he has a little in the bank and he spends very frugally.
Right. So you've given him a set of skills that are going to work. I mean, you know, he's investigative skills. He can kill if he has to. He certainly is, you know, able to defend not only himself but anybody that he's wishing to protect. And he does have, from time to time they come in, he does have a certain number of allies. They, you know, he tries to be kind of completely on his own, but nonetheless there can come some echoes in. Particularly in the new book, Without Fail, we learn about his brother. Right. Which was kind of a nudie. Yeah. But, and then you've given him some kind of income so he can drift along here. And, you know, he's really, I hate to use the word because it's overused, but he really has, it's easy to make him an iconic figure once you've set him up that way. He's really kind of a modern knight on a quest, isn't he? He
is, absolutely. And I know we've talked about this before, and it's possible, you know, some people are very keen to prove the link between the modern genre hero to the Western hero of 100 years ago, which is, of course, very easy to do. You know, the loner, as you say, Shane, drifts into town, sorts out the business, drifts out of town. But then we can trace that back way into medieval literature.
Absolutely, it's
the
really
chivalric
Mallory.
tradition.